In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Welcome back to another edition of the Daily Memphian's Memphis Grizzlies podcast. This is your host, Drew Hill, joined as always by columnist Chris Harrington. Thanks for giving us the week off for the holidays, by the way. We're now back to talk some Grizz. State of the Grizz, not quite the same it was last week when we were not recording. It is since taken
a
rough turn.
Well, it's been wild. I don't remember the last time we talked, but I think between now and then, the Grizzlies have been on both sides of blowouts. We've had players return, we've had players exit, we've had trades not happen, we've had injuries. There's been a lot going on.
Yeah, an awful lot. Maybe we just start with the immediate here and get it out the way. The Grizzlies were blown out last night. We're recording this early Monday morning, by the way. I know a lot of people are probably going to be listening to this for Ja Morant news. I suspect that, there's certainly the potential that the Grizzlies release an injury update like later on today. And so I would keep an eye out at the Daily Memphian because we don't have that yet as we're recording this. So we'll see what happens there on the Ja front. We'll talk a little bit about it. But anyway, so last night the Grizzlies get blown out by the Oklahoma City Thunder. We don't have to dwell on it too much. I mean, that was just a good team against a very undermanned Grizzlies team, in my opinion. Now, the Thunder were missing some players as well, but the magnitude of the injuries is just not quite the same. And I think the takeaway from that game is, all right, when are we going to get some players back? Because they were far from being competitive in that basketball game. A 9-0 run kind of gave you a little hope to start the game, and then that was over pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it was somewhat disappointing just because the Grizzlies have been so competitive no matter what. I mean, Ja's missed a lot of games this year. The other players have missed a lot of games. And that was only the second time all season they'd lost by more than 15 points. The other one was game 2 at Houston. But that was really like a little bit of a pileup, right? Not only are you missing Ja, you're missing half your roster with Ja. You're on the road against a team that is the best team in the West until someone proves otherwise, and that is the best defense in basketball this season. And that was just that was sort of a perfect storm situation for the Grizzlies. Now, it may be that the full strength the Grizzlies can't hang with the Thunder. We don't know. We'll find out maybe, but we don't know that. That could be the case, but that wasn't the case last night. That was a case of just all the forces were aligned against the Grizzlies in that game.
Yeah, it was a disappointing just situation because I think everybody was looking forward to that sort of showdown there. And both teams were rolling heading into that game. The Thunder have now won 11 in a row. It felt like we were going to be headed towards a showdown of the Titans in the Western Conference. And that was just not what we got. Thanks to the state of the Memphis Grizzlies. Let's just go down the injury report because, like I said, I think everybody just wants to know when are they going to get guys back. And you start with Ja. I thought you wrote a column that really hit the nail on the head and is important for people to read to understand the context of this of where the Grizzlies stand amid the Ja Morant injury news. Try to pick apart what is coming next here. So let's start with that. You essentially, I'll let you expand on this, but
go ahead. I actually think we should back up a little bit and talk about the Ja injury specifically. I had intended to wait until the Grizzlies gave us more to write specifically about the Ja injury in his absence, and I still will. What I wrote yesterday was about the trade that happened between the Lakers and the Nets and all the reporting around the Grizzlies offer and what that knowledge, the knowledge we have about what they offered, which is unusual. And I think that, by the way, that reporting is There is some discrepancy amid the reports, but it's generally accurate. I am very comfortable to say that reporting is accurate. And I wrote about what that knowledge tells us about the team. And part of that's related to Ja. We should back up and talk about the injury itself, right? For people who may be a little confused about it. So it's called the only thing the Grizzlies have put out is on the injury report. They call it an AC joint sprain, which is, as I understand it, that's the joint that connects the collarbone to the shoulder. It's a somewhat unusual injury in basketball. It's the kind of injury that, based on my Google research, the recovery time for an athlete could be anywhere from 2 weeks to you have surgery on it and it takes 4 months, right? The Grizzlies have not said anything about that injury other than they called it an AC joint sprain, and Taylor Jenkins said publicly they're still looking at it, right? So they left a lot of mystery out there about that. I think that's because they don't know, that they don't want to put out a longer statement until they have gone through all the medical hoops they need to run through. But, and this will tie back to what I wrote, I think we can discern from that trade offer that the Grizzlies do not believe this is a worst case scenario situation with John Morant. Even though they have not told us that, that trade offer I think tells us that in terms of what they believe.
Right, because you're not trading for a player like that
The
in a
the tra-
scenario in which you might be without John Morant for the rest of the season.
right. The trade offer the Grizzlies made was, the contract match was Luke Kennard and John Conchar, but it was from a value standpoint, it was primarily a 2025 first round pick for Dorian Finney-Smith. Dorian Finney-Smith is 31 years old. He's a 3-and-D role player. He's got a player option next season. So if you trade for him, he may or may not be on your team next season. You're making the trade for the playoffs. That is why you make that trade. It does not help you in the short term because he doesn't replace any of the ball handling you're losing with John Morant. You don't know if it helps you beyond this season because of his player option. If you make that trade, you make it entirely for this year's playoffs. And you do not make a trade that is focused on this year's playoffs if you believe that your playoff hopes have been significantly diminished by the John Morant injury. So I think that offer, my number one thing, I had 3 points in the column, but my number one point is that offer tells us that the Grizzlies believe that whatever the absence is for Morant, and I think it will be a meaningful absence, it is not such that they think it has meaningfully altered their playoff goals.
Right. That's not to say that, Ja's going to be back the next game, right? No. But it is to say that,
Then we can tie this into that because I think that's the big thing. I mean, I don't know what they're going to say. I will personally be surprised if it's not weeks plural that he's out.
yes, I would be too. But I also don't get the sense that as of right now, they feel like this is a season altering, season ending,
Right.
disastrous situation that they find themselves in. So, I think that is good news, and you'll kind of take that given the context of the injury because that's the same shoulder he just had surgery on,
No,
right?
that was the scary thing about it. Yeah.
And he was clearly in a lot of pain in that moment. Like it was very obvious, the shot of him in agony on the bench was scary for Memphis Grizzlies fans and the Grizzlies themselves. So I think that we can leave the Josh stuff there. I mean, hopefully we get a more firm, at least a reevaluation date to come in the short term here. And I think we will, but obviously that's not good news, especially with the schedule coming up. And we'll get into that, but we have more injuries to touch on. The other one, it was kind of a out of the blue type thing. No one really expected it, but Zach Edey was ruled out with the concussion like 2 hours before tip off on Monday. I went through last night as the game was going on, the NBA's concussion policy and procedures. And essentially, what I learned by doing that is like, there's all kinds of steps that these guys have to take in order to get back on the floor after a concussion, whether that be, starting with an exercise bike and then running and then non contact basketball and all these, steps that you take. And then they have to examine the player after each one of the steps. And then, on top of that, they have to complete this entire process and it has to be 48 hours before they can return. So to me, you hope that the symptoms go away. Concussions are tricky. You never know when the symptoms are going to fade out for Zach Edey. Hopefully that's soon for the Grizzlies, but how are we supposed to know um, right now the severity of them? And he's going to have to go through that entire process before he gets back on the floor. So he missed the game against the Thunder. They have a couple of days off to if the symptoms are completely gone, he can start going through the process of trying to get back on the court. But there is a process that's going to take. This is
Right.
not an ankle, right? So there is a possibility, obviously, that he could miss some time, which that's disappointing. And who knows? But it felt like he was hitting his stride right before the news that he had concussion symptoms yesterday. So that's another one that comes, it just stinks the timing of it because he had just played what was probably his best game, one game prior.
Yeah, he'd really been picking up momentum since going back in the starting lineup. He had a rough game against the Clippers, matched up with his sort of doppelganger of sorts. I always butcher this guy's name, of Vika Zubac for the Clippers, who is sort of like Zach Edey. This could be your life, like that. Zach Edey could be better than him, but like that guy's really good and similarly built, kind of way. And he sort of had his way with the whole Grizzlies team, not just with Zach Edey in that game. But since then, Zach Edey had been playing great. A couple things on that. Apparently the concussion came from and it's something that happened in that game against the Pelicans. I did not notice it when it happened at all. Um, I don't think obviously there's a lot of uncertainty around that, so you can't know. I'd be surprised if it's a longer term thing, but I think it definitely puts the next game, that New Year's Eve game against the Suns, in pretty serious doubt for him. Yeah,
Yeah, that's kind of the point by going through it. It's like,
yeah,
it's going to take a minute just for them to do all the stuff that they need to do, and they're on the road, right?
right.
And now he's got all these tests he's going to have to pass to get back on the court. They do have the time, right? Like they've got a couple days off now. Well, one day off before the next game, and if he's able to pass all this tests, great. But it is going to be a chore for them to do that. So we'll see if he's available on the 31st. The other ones that we got updates on recently, and I hate that we're doing this because as I wrote last night, last night felt like a rerun of the 2023-24 season. It really did. Like it was like,
Yeah.
dang, they don't have anybody out on the court. They're starting 6'5" John Conchar at power forward. But the other ones were Marcus Smart, who will be reevaluated in 2 weeks. Reevaluated is the key term there, meaning he's probably going to miss more than 2 weeks. And then Santi Aldama was listed as week to week with an ankle, which is slightly better, but still week to week probably means he's going to miss at least a week, which means he's probably not going to play on this road trip. And so and that injury was one where he couldn't put weight on the ankle coming off the court, and so you
That
do
one look
expect he's going to miss time too, right?
that one looked pretty bad when it happened, right? That's one where when you saw it happen, you thought, okay, that he's missing a little bit of time, and so yeah, to me the week to week was a positive diagnosis for him. I was expecting probably worse than that. Of course, week to week could mean anything, but the history has been this season with these week to week diagnoses that diagnoses that they people have who have gotten them have come back fairly soon. Like it has not been like 3-4 weeks on those for the most part.
Yeah, but it could easily be two. And
Yeah,
again, with the timing here, it's not great because they're playing
yeah.
10 more games in a row against teams that want to be competitive in the Western Conference. I mean, the Spurs are like the one iffy if you want to go on like potential playoff teams, I think.
Well,
Maybe the
I
case.
I think I mean the Grizzlies. We'll see what happens. 0 for 1 right now on this stretch again after losing to the Thunder. This is set up to be a very bumpy patch for the Grizzlies based on the schedule and the players that they're going to have available. I mean, the silver line, not only silver lining's not the right cliche, but I mean, the counterbalance to that is they built up a nice cushion. I think they have a 3.5 game cushion from like in terms of the playoff play in cutoff line, that 6-7 line. They built up a nice little cushion for themselves, and it's still fairly early in the season. So you can have a bumpy 10-11 game stretch here, and then like there's still half the season to go,
Yeah, I was gonna pull up the schedule
I
here.
think the bummer part of it is not that the Grizzlies could slide a little bit in this stretch. The bummer part of it is that I think people were looking at this stretch as a real testing ground, a measuring stick, like an 11 game, 10 game, whatever measuring stick. Okay, the Grizzlies have built up this good schedule and they're just running over bad teams. They're running over Toronto, or they're running over whoever, right? Let's see what they look like on the road against good teams. Let's get a real feel for how good this team is. And now, if they have a bumpy stretch, it's not going to feel like, oh, we know now we know the team was not as good as we thought. It's going to be like Ja Morant's not playing. It's not the Aldama's not playing. So it's going to be less value in terms of getting a real sense of how good the team is.
I mean, Aldama was a huge loss, honestly.
Yeah,
Like Ja was an obvious huge loss. Aldama's a very underrated huge loss because I actually wrote a feature on him. You can go back and read it if you want. The timing stunk because he got hurt the next game. But I did this what I thought was a pretty nice feature on Santi Aldama about what he had the sort of the breakthrough he was having again this season after seasons
right.
of breakthroughs in the past. I found it hilarious. Like, they're buddies, so like it was a serious quote, but it also Desmond Bain can say it because they're friends. He just flat said Santi was trash as a rookie, like he was not good. And the next season he arrived and he was that much better, and it's been step after step after step for Santi, but with some breaks in between. And I think he's hit a lot of breakthroughs. And I wrote about a book that he read, very famous book called The Inner Game of Tennis, been quoted by Steve Kerr, been quoted by Tom Brady, like all these things, and sort of how he had arrived at this most recent breakthrough. Um, and it felt like he was, and this was a point that was made to me by multiple people on the Grizzlies and around the Grizzlies. Um, is that Santi better than anybody? Maybe like fits the style of play, the three Ps, that sort of thing. Like he was in the top three in the team in like tip ins and transition points. He's a great passer for his position. The 3-point shooting had taken a real jump up. It had been over 50% over like close to a month. Um, Now that's not, sustainable, but it was obviously a big bonus. And I think with Santi, losing him was a pretty big blow. I think that was an underrated blow to this team. And that severely set him back. Even against the Thunder, if you had Ja Morant out there, it feels like you would need more than that to win a game like that where they got blown out. And Santi is a major piece of this team. So losing him obviously stunk. On your point about the schedule, I keep bringing up these 10 games. So you've got the Suns next. That'll be New Year's Eve tomorrow as we record this. Then on the road against the Kings, on the road against the Warriors, the Mavericks, the Rockets, on the road against the Timberwolves, on the road against the Rockets, 2 games on the road against the Spurs, and a home game against the Timberwolves. If they win 3 of those games, is that enough
I mean, enough that sort of enough for what is sort of the question, right? Because
for enough to satisfy you
no, I
in
mean,
this
no,
10 game
it
stretch?
wouldn't be satisfying, but it would be like it wouldn't be catastrophic, right? That's sort of my point about there's enough cushion. There's enough cushion in terms of the record they built up and the amount of season left to go that like nothing's going to happen in this stretch that's going to suddenly be like the Grizzlies are not a playoff team anymore. Like there's too much cushion on the front end and too much cushion on the back end for that. I think so. We're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I'm thinking about this as an 11 game stretch, starting with the Thunder game. 11 games, Thunder game through MLK Day. That's 11 straight games, all against teams in the Western Conference playoff race. The majority of them are on the road. I think 8 of the 11 are on the road. Um, you know, I would want to go 4-7, maybe. Like 3 seems like a little rough. 4-7, 5-6. I think, even I would feel better about that. But I think if you can be anywhere around 500 in this stretch, I think given the schedule and given your absences, you would have to feel good about that. This New Year's Eve game against Phoenix is going to be the Thunder thing. You almost have to set aside because the Thunder are just rolling. Phoenix is not rolling. Phoenix is
No,
down to 11. They've lost a couple in a
neither are
row.
the Kings,
No, that's right. Neither are the Kings. And
but they're
so
competitive, you know? They're
no, no,
competitive.
no. You could lose any of these games at full strength. And so when you're not full strength, especially when you have John Morant, you may be the underdog in almost all of them. But the Grizzlies, if the Grizzlies are really as good and deep as they seem to be, they should pull out some wins in this stretch. You're facing all competitive teams, all real teams. But to your point, you're not facing like Oklahoma City every night.
Yeah, but yeah, and you got to leave some space for Jaren to be awesome, right? Like Jaren is not going to be bad in all these games. There's going to be two or three of these games where Jaren's awesome because Jaren's been awesome all season. He didn't play great against the Thunder, but he was incredible against the Pelicans, right? So you get some awesome Jaren games in there. You've got a chance to win some of these. But I do anticipate that this is going to be a rough stretch. And you're going to get the Mavs without Luca.
Right.
These aren't impossible games to win,
It seems
but
like the guys. Part of the problem is that your ball handling depth has been so shook by these absences because it's not just Ja. It's Ja and Marcus Smart and Vince Williams and Gigi Jackson, sort of all out at the same time. I mean, Brandon Clark, we haven't talked about. He missed the game against OKC. That was a late scratch. He had been questionable. That seems like he'll probably be back the next game. Edie is the kind of thing, well, he might miss another game or two, but it probably won't be more than that. But on the perimeter, I don't know if you're getting any of those guys back. Those four guys, and add Santi to that too, because Santi's plays more on the perimeter as a big. That's five guys. I don't know if you're getting any of them back in this 11
the
game stretch we're
one,
talking about.
the one, maybe not in the stretch we're talking about, but if you push it to MLK Day, the one maybe, because it's 2 to 4 weeks right now, would be Vince.
Right.
Like maybe. And then Gigi. I mean, Gigi, when they gave him his return to play window, I think that was December the 4th, and it was what, 6 to 8 weeks. So maybe you're getting him back on the tail end of this.
Right.
Um, those are the two guys with firm return to play timelines. Granted, those are bigger windows; they leave 2 weeks of room, but
It's too bad with Gigi in particular. It's too bad that he hasn't been ready to come back yet because there was a lot of concern early in the season about is this team just so good and so deep that he's going to be healthy, he's not going to be getting to play, he's going to get lost in the mix. And like this is one of those moments where the opportunities have come. I mean, they started John Conchar at power forward against the Thunder. There was room for Gigi to play right now, and he's just not ready yet.
yeah, I mean, I think Gigi would get on the court. I don't know. I think that that's a fair thing, and that was a fair thing for us to address. But I do think that Gigi's almost so talented that they would find a way to get
Right.
him on the court because they need to. Um, but
What
yeah,
did
you're
you
right. This would be
did you
nice.
What did you make of them starting? I was a little surprised because I thought about it when I saw Brandon Clark out too. I thought about the players they had remaining, and I thought, okay, how are they going to do this? And I didn't think they were going to start Jay Huff because they only had two bigs. And I figured they'd toggle Jaron and Jay. My assumption was that they were going to start Laravia at the four. They started Conchar.
Yeah, I did too. I thought that they would probably start Laravia. I mean, you had Cam Spencer playing first quarter minutes in that game. Like that was something I wrote and then I deleted, but because it's like not a reflection on Conchar and Cam Spencer as much as it's just the state of the team where like you have guys that aren't playing at all this season that are already playing significant minutes in the first quarter. Um, I was a little surprised, but then John Conchar finished the game with 15 rebounds, and I was like, well, yeah, I guess that checks out. They need rebounding, right? Like so,
Yeah, no.
and
To
he
me,
was
to me,
great. He was
to me,
good.
there's sort of two or three things there. One is that Jake's been playing off the bench and playing well. You don't disrupt his role. The other is that Conchar is a better rebounder than Laravia because Conchar is a better rebounder than most people. And so you get the rebounding there. And then you wonder a little bit about people are going to speculate, and I don't think it's not necessarily something I would dismiss, the sort of trade market showcase thing a little bit because we already know that they tried to move him in the Brooklyn deal. And so showing people that, hey, like this guy can play. Like I know he's like the 15th man for us. Certain people call him Jitty, and it seems like a novelty act, but he actually can play. Like John Conchar is a really good 15th man. He could be some team's 12th or 11th or whatever. So I wonder about that a little bit. Another thing, and I'm gonna be the bad guy here, but that was a game that really underscored for me, made me wonder about their two-way situation because you got half your team out.
Oh, don't do this, Chris.
Why Yuki is not the main guy I'm going to talk about.
Okay.
It's Castle, like, but it's true of Yuki too. But Yuki, there's another part of it. Like everyone loves Yuki. There's side benefits. I get it. Like I'm not even talking about that. But it is clear. Like you got one point guard available, and Yuki doesn't play until it's garbage time. That makes it crystal clear that he is not a two-way guy who actually helps you that they believe actually helps them at the NBA level. Otherwise, he would have played
I
more.
mean, yeah, they used Gilliard last year.
That's right. Gilliard was that. Gilliard was the guy who was supposed to be the G League point guard, but then when you were in a fix, he played for you. And Yuki is they're not. This is they had Sky Pim's the only point guard they had, and they didn't use Yuki. But that wasn't even where I was going. But that is to me but that is a point that you can't refute. It just is. But you can say the same thing about Colin Castleton. They only had two bigs in that game, Sharon Jackson Jr. and Jay Huff, and he's a 7-footer, 6'11" guy on a two-way on the active roster for that game, and he doesn't play until it's garbage time. You're playing John Conchar starting at power forward. Like I'm not trying to I'm not trying to be a bad guy here, but to me the point is to like talk about the team honestly. Like what are you getting out of that if he can't play for you in that moment? Like why are you using that on a two-way for that? He's not selling jerseys anywhere. I don't really understand it.
Yeah. The Castleton thing is a little surprising. I honestly was not thinking about that last night. I was more worried about the state of the team.
Yeah,
Again, I was about to hit back on the remote and make sure that it wasn't a 2023-24 game. And then I saw
yeah.
Jalen Wells out there and I was like, oh, wait, no, that's this season. That's the state of this team again. And hopefully they get some of these guys back. Now, listen, we're not at the point where we were last year with multiple stars out months, right? Like that is not the case, but it is salvageable still. But it's rocky right now, and they've got to get some of these players back. Thankfully, they're still 11 games over 500. So
We just sort of grazed over the Marcus Smart thing. I mean, it just has not been working out, man.
no,
And it's not quite Justice Winslow level of not working out because Marcus Smart has played many more productive games for the Grizzlies than Justice Winslow ever did. But he hasn't played many games, period. It seems like it's always something. And we're a year and a half into it now, and he has just never been able to settle in and find any kind of rhythm with this team.
yeah, no. I mean it's getting to a point where it's a point of frustration. I think for all involved, right? Like Marcus wants to
Yeah.
stay on the floor. Everyone wants to see him fit with the team and play well, but it just has not been in the cards so far. And the finger stuff, it's like it was a finger injury last year, different finger, but a finger
Different figure.
injury last year.
Unlike the ankles and the shoulders, there are more options there. He's got 10 of them, so it's a different finger. Let's make that clear. If people don't know, different finger. Same shoulder for Ja, different finger for Marcus Smart. My understanding, this is a less severe, it's a more complicated finger. Like there's some medical language, anatomical language I'd never heard before. You learn about the anatomy covering the NBA. I didn't know you had a hood on your finger, but I learned that this week. But my understanding, it is not as severe as whatever finger injury he had a year ago. And so,
I think I'm a more simple person than you, Chris. I just say finger. It's a finger. I don't know. It's a finger.
He's got a finger.
One of them. One of those. It's one of those, It's one of those things that are attached to the palms of your
Right.
hands, and it's not right. So,
Yeah.
Marcus Smart's got to figure out the fingers.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to figure out your fingers. And so hopefully he's back eventually. I mean, and the other thing here is the trade stuff, because you do wonder at what point he's going to get involved. Let's talk about that, but first let's take a break for a message from our sponsor.
Want to make a big impact without getting lost in a big system? Join Youth Villages to be a force for families while becoming part of one. Help make positive changes on a national scale, one community at a time. It takes a family to transform lives. Start with yours. Apply now at youthvillages.org/careers.
Are you I mean, all right. So the two players that were rumored to be included in that Nets trade, we can get into the trades a little bit because we're getting towards that
And
time of
and
year.
I'm going to stipulate for listeners, this is more than a rumor.
Right.
Those guys were offered. They were offered.
Yes. John
Conchar and Kennard.
Conchar and Luke Kennard. You know, the other player for money matching purposes would probably be Smart, right?
If you're talking about a bigger contract like the Cam Johnson stuff that people again
Right.
that is total speculation. We have no idea whether they've offered Cam Johnson or will. But in that scenario, it almost have to have Marcus Smart involved.
Right. So, and then there's a detail here, which is that Kennard can veto trades.
Yeah, I probably should have mentioned that in the column because I had a commenter on the column ask about that. That is true. He has the option to veto trades. I do not believe that that is an active factor in any of this, and in fact, none of the reporting out of Brooklyn on this suggested that that had anything to do with the trade not going through. I think that is a technicality, but I don't believe that's something that my suspicion. This is only suspicion. My suspicion is that the Grizzlies and Kennard have sort of an understanding on that front. I don't think that's something that's gonna stop a deal from happening.
So where do we think the Grizzlies stand in the trade market? They're active, clearly.
Well,
Are there options out there still? I mean, there are clearly a few. Do you think that they can get something done?
I thought that Finney Smith was the most obvious trade target on the board. I had when I wrote a trade column 3 weeks ago, I suggested four potential things. That was the one by far. Like, two of the guys I wrote about have never been reported to be even be available. Right? Just me like trying to find things that make sense in the world. The Finney Smith to me thing was by far the most likely thing. I suggested that very trade. John Conchar, Luke Kennard, and draft assets for Dorian Finney-Smith. And I wondered, and the thing I wrote, I wondered, is it going to be multiple seconds or does it have to be a first? Like I basically nailed that trade, but so did lots of other people because it was so obvious. There's nothing else out there that's that obvious. What we know is that they are interested in making a move and they're willing to at least trade their 225 first round pick. We don't know if they're willing to trade multiple picks or picks further out. We don't know that. We don't know how interested they are in moving Marcus Smart. We know they're willing to trade Luke Kennard. We know they're willing to trade John Conchar. We know they're willing to trade a 2025 first. And even though there's no evidence, I think context clues can tell you they're going to be willing to trade Jake LaRavia, who's headed to free agency. I think that's pretty obvious. What can you get with that stuff? I don't know. Like the other names I've mentioned are Herb Jones from New Orleans, who I think fits.
By
He
the way,
fit.
2 for 6, 0 for 3 from 3 point range with 6 rebounds and 2 assists against the Grizzlies. Maybe the value
Yeah,
decrease. Bargain.
he
Bargain
said better.
alert.
He said better games other than that, right? He's a guy we both like. He's one of your Alabama guys. He's a really good player. New Orleans is terrible. The reason I put him on the list is that New Orleans is going nowhere, and they have invested more in a similar player in Trey Murphy, right? So it makes sense that they should be willing to listen to offers for him. But to be clear, there's zero reporting that they are, none, and so I don't know about that. And I mentioned Derek Jones Jr. for the Clippers, so I think that to me also makes some sense logically for both teams. But the Clippers are right in the mix of the playoffs. There's zero reporting that he would be available. The only other guy out there there's reporting about he might be available is Cam Johnson. And I think everyone thinks the Grizzlies would make an offer for Cam Johnson, but as with Dorian Finney-Smith, so would lots of other teams, right? So who knows? So I don't know. I wonder. Another thing about this, I wrote about this a little bit in the thing, is that the fact that they made that trade offer when they did, A, says they're not that worried about the John Morant part, but it also says they're not that worried about getting through Morant's absence because that trade would have, in theory, I believe, yes, but would have made their playoff roster better. It would have hurt them in the short term probably with Morant out because you're trading away a ball handler in Luke Kennard and not bringing one back, right? Like you already have this deficit of ball handlers. So it seems like they're not going to be they're not it seems like they're not looking like to add a guard, add a ball handler for short term. They're thinking about the April roster and the May roster more than the January roster. But I wonder, like, would you do like John Conchar and a couple second round picks to add another point guard to the roster? Like to me, that would not be a crazy thing to do either.
No, I definitely don't think that would be a crazy thing to do. I'd love to. I don't have any information on any of it, but it feels like we've had so many almosts with the Nets. I wonder if the Nets are wary of trading with the Memphis Grizzlies. You had so many almosts, they
Well,
wanted to be in the Kevin Durant sweepstakes. They wanted Mikal Bridges. They made this offer for Dorian Finney-Smith.
right.
Man, there's a history between these two teams, and they
They
just can't get one
that
done.
that is not the first time the Grizzlies have offered a first round pick for Dorian Finney-Smith. By the way, they did that 2 years ago. The same time period where they were making offers for OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges. And Tim McMahon has said this on a podcast, so I'm not the first person to put this out, but I independently know it to be true. They also made an offer for Dorian Finney-Smith, right? And so, I, to me, the one part of this we haven't talked about, and I wrote about it in the columns. You can just go read it there. There's this question of like, why did the Nets, if the Grizzlies offered that, why did the Nets take the Lakers deal instead? I think if you get into the weeds of it, you can see why the Nets did that. I think some people from a distance were confused about you take seconds instead of a first, but you really dig into the situation. Yeah, I think you can see why they would prefer the Lakers offer. But
Yeah,
but
because the draft capital isn't all that different, honestly.
right, but it could have gone the other way. I think when the Grizzlies made that offer, I think they thought that they were going to get Dorian Finney-Smith, right? They thought they had a chance to, right? I think they thought that was a serious, credible offer, which it was, for that player. And so we'll see. I think this is. I doubt we'll get the level of leakage on anything else they offer that we got from this, which was wild. I don't know whether that was coming. It was not coming from the Grizzlies. Whether it was coming from the Nets or coming from an agent connected to one of the many players involved, who knows? But it was wild the level of like torrent, like open the faucet wide leaking going on about that stuff that you don't see that very often. I doubt that'll be the case again, but I'm certain that won't be the last trade offer the Grizzlies make. There's still got a month before the deadline.
Yeah, I would expect that they'll continue to be active. Especially given the state of the roster right now. If you have any more injuries, and you did have Jake LaRavia go down with an
Yeah,
ankle, like the front court's in complete disarray right now. I mean, what do you do? Like, how do you survive? That's the question. Now, these next 2 weeks are about survival for the Memphis Grizzlies, and you hope that, like I said, you hope you can get big Jaren games because that's the pathway to winning. I think over these next 2 weeks is find a way to get massive Jaren games and put yourself in a position to be competitive. Make some shots. Like they didn't make any shots in that first half against the Thunder. They got so many open shots, and like Jay Huff was the only one that felt like went on a little bit of a good run um, in that game. I also now that we're talking the injuries again, I just remembered I responded to a comment at the Daily Memphian. Somebody asked, and I think it's a fair question to ask. Do you think the pure pace and number of possessions adds to injury risk? I think the more times you're driving, trying to score the ball, I would suppose maybe it's a slight difference. But do
I
you do
don't.
you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, there's different ways you can look at that. I mean, the pace sort of cuts against the minutes, right? You can say they're playing fewer minutes, but they're playing more possessions per minute, and so the number of possessions you're playing, sort of evens out. I think the focus on the driving. I think NBA writ large, not just the Grizzlies. There's been an increase in pace and more spacing, which requires more movement on defense. I think people really underestimate the wear and tear aspect of the way the modern game is played and the way that contributes to injury. So I think that's true broadly, not just specific for the Grizzlies, but for the league. I think that's a really underrated thing. For the Grizzlies specifically, yeah, maybe, but to me, yeah, look at specific situations, right? The thing about the Josh stuff that is, I say it's interesting. It is interesting. It's unfortunately interesting. The jaw injury stuff is not wear and tear based. It's not like minutes accumulation based. It is incident. It is impact injuries. He's having impact injuries. It is the shot to the shoulder. He's fallen to the ground twice on his hip. The jaw injury stuff, to the degree that you can link it to something and say it's not just random, the linkage is the style of play he plays, not the team. The style of play he plays connected to the body type he is. He's a high impact player who's had a very relatively slight frame, and I think that is contributing to injury situations, and he knows that too. That's why he's been more selective about dunking this season. This is not a mystery.
Right. He's making, I think, good steps in trying to keep his body healthy. It just isn't
Yeah,
hasn't worked out.
right.
Um, So I'm sure that's a point of frustration. And you saw if you're on Instagram and you saw his Instagram story, he posted a picture of himself looking kind of sad. Now, you know what? This injury probably is going to take him out of any award conversation this year. I think
Yep.
he only has to miss like what 4 more games. So
Yeah, no, I think that's done.
that's done.
And I think he would like to get back to that for what it says about his stature in the league. He's got his contract though, so there's not stuff on the line as far as that goes.
For
But
Jaron,
yeah,
there is.
Jaron, there is, and not only all NBA teams now are not position based. So you start just pulling guys out, like Luca too. Luca and Ja both like not going to have enough games. You sort of, you pulling out Paolo Banchero. You're probably pulling out Franz Wagner. I think Kevin Durant probably not going to hit the game. I mean, the opportunity is there for Jaren Jackson to make an All NBA team. That's for sure.
Yeah, and that'd be good timing for him, right?
Yep. Yep.
I think that would qualify him for a supermax,
It
right?
would. It would.
Yeah,
It's either All NBA, MVP, or Defensive Player of the Year.
right. So we'll see what happens there, and this also probably is going to hurt Ja's chances of making an All-Star game. Maybe the fans can get him voted in, but when you don't play a lot of games, I think you know, if you're picking an All-Star for the Grizzlies this season and you say that they're towards the top of the league, let's say that they do survive this. The most valuable player on the team over the course of the whole season has been Jaren. So
Yeah,
I think,
I wouldn't say Jaren is a lock for the All Star game quite yet. Because what if they go like over 11 in this stretch we're talking
yeah,
about? Then that changes
yeah,
in a hurry. But if the Grizzlies navigate this stretch fairly well and they're still a top 3, top 4 team in the West at the end of it, I think Jaren's All Star chances are very strong.
yeah. So Grizzlies not the most fun podcast. The Grizzlies are not beating the crap out of teams anymore. Um, this has been a short little blip. I guess they did kind of follow the pattern against the Pelicans and the Raptors, but it's going to be really tough to keep this blowout streak up over this stretch of games. I think that has been a notable trend. Like, we talk about half statistics, like partial statistics of like, oh, first quarter, second quarter, third quarter over the course of a full game may not be quite as relevant. But it is a real trend that in the first half this season, the Grizzlies have been unreal, like unbelievable. They have the highest average differential in the league. Like they don't wait. Like there's no feeling out process when this team is healthy for them. Like it's just they hit the floor running right away. So that has been a very impressive trend for the Grizzlies this season. Well, I think that's going to do it for us this week. I hope everybody had a good holidays and has a happy new year. Make sure you go read. I really do think it's important. Go read Chris's column on what the potential trade offer means for Memphis, potentially for the Ja Morant situation and more, and keep an eye out over at the Daily Memphian to see what may come of that if the Grizzlies do put out some sort of injury report later today. All right. We'll talk to you guys next week. For Drew and for Chris, we're out of here.